Power can move armies and topple empires, but what happens when that power flows through a single fragile life, bound to an ancient energy that touches every star? The answer is the story of Anakin Skywalker, a quiet thread in the Force that would shape galactic history far beyond anything he could understand. At first, there is no war, no armor, no mechanical breathing. There is only a distant desert world and a boy who dreams of the sky. In the mythology of the Force destinies are not straight lines. They are currents, light side and dark side, moving against each other in endless slow conflict. Sometimes those currents swirl around entire civilizations. Sometimes they converge on one child. This is the point where they collide, a place where compassion and fear, hope and anger share the same small heart. The Force does not shout in these moments. It whispers, and what followed was not a sudden fall into darkness, but a long, quiet descent. This is the story of Darth Vader, told not as a tale of a monster, but as the life of a human being who longed for freedom, who loved deeply, and who feared loss more than anything else, from a mysterious birth, without a known father, to a final breath beneath a dying Death Star. Every step in between becomes part of one continuous path. The slave boy on Tatooine, the bold Jedi Knight, the feared enforcer of a ruthless empire. Each is the same person, seen through a different shadow. Tonight, this story unfolds slowly, gently, with the calm pacing of a documentary remembered by starlight. The narration moves at the speed of a resting heartbeat, each moment described with enough detail to picture, but never enough intensity to disturb. This is a chronicle meant to be heard, while eyelids grow heavy and thoughts drift. The rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker becomes a soft backdrop, a distant galactic history carried on the quiet hum of the Force. Over time, the journey will move through each era of his life, first to the sands of Tatooine, to a small shop cluttered with parts and metal where a boy builds droids and pod racers and meets a Jedi named Qui-Gon Jinn and a handmaiden named Padme. Then to the halls of the Jedi and the bond with Obi-Wan Kenobi, to secret vows of marriage and troubling visions of death and war. From there, the path bends toward the dark side, toward Palpatine's patient voice, the burning rivers of Mustafar, and the black armor that keeps breath and pain alive. Yet even within the mask, the currents of the Force still move, carrying memories of Padme and the faint possibility of change. In the end, a son reaches out to choices made, and this act of mercy would reshape galactic history. The quiet redemption of Darth Vader waits at the edge of the story, just beyond the next calm breath. To reach that quiet redemption, the story of Darth Vader must be placed back into the vast river of galactic history. For thousands of years, the Jedi and the Sith had already risen and fallen in cycles of war and uneasy peace, their conflict shaping the Republic, its borders, and its fears. Long before a boy named Anakin Skywalker took his first breath, the Force had been pulled between dark side and light side, and ancient prophecies whispered of balance that had not yet come. Most tales of this era are anchored to a familiar moment, the Battle of Yavin, when a small rebel attack destroyed the first Death Star and exposed the weakness of the Empire. Historians measure time as before and after that explosion of fire against the Black. Yet beneath Star Destroyers and Senate chambers, beneath clone troopers and stormtroopers, runs a quieter measure of time, the sequence of choices made by one person who would shape all of it. From years before the Phantom Menace to the quiet fires after Return of the Jedi, Anakin's path becomes a spine holding the galactic narrative together. Popular memory often freezes Darth Vader as a faceless enforcer of the Emperor's will, a towering mask and a mechanical breath moving through the metal corridors of the Death Star. Expectation says the story begins with a monster. In truth, the story of this dark figure begins with a frightened child on the desert world of Tatooine, owned as property, dreaming of the stars. Over time, that child becomes a gifted pod racer, then a daring pilot, then a conflicted Jedi Knight, and finally, an aging father whose last decision breaks an empire and restores the light side in a single act. Seen from above, the grand saga of the Republic's fall and the Empire's rise can appear to be about armies and senates, about Palpatine's schemes and the Clone Wars raging from Geonosis to Coruscant. Yet traced slowly, moment by moment, it can be followed along one continuous line. A meeting in a dusty shop with Qui-Gon Jinn and Padme, a promise made to a mother who will be left behind, a forbidden marriage on Naboo, a vision of death that tightens into fear, a choice in a Chancellor's office that turns a Jedi into a Sith. This journey will move through each of those eras without rushing, from the first hints of the Chosen One prophecy to the last sparks of the second Death Star's explosion. No battles will be skipped, no quiet conversation ignored when it bends the future. What followed was not a simple fall, but a lifetime of small steps, each one resting on the expectations the galaxy placed upon one child. To understand Darth Vader, the tale must begin even earlier than Tatooine, in an older galaxy that had already decided what the Chosen One should be. The next calm chapter lies in the world he was born into, and in the ancient weight that settled on his shoulders long before he could speak. A prophecy whispers, the Chosen One and the balance of the Force. In the quiet halls of the Jedi Temple, long before Anakin Skywalker's first breath, there was already a story waiting for him. It was not written in books or carved into stone, but whispered in meditation chambers and spoken in cautious tones among the wisest masters. For thousands of years, the Jedi had guarded an old prophecy. It spoke of a chosen one, conceived by the Force itself, who would bring balance to that unseen energy field that bound the galactic tapestry together. Power corrupts, but what happens when that power is the Force flowing through every living thing? The answer, the Jedi believed, was that somewhere, someday, one being would emerge to correct any great imbalance, to stand at the fulcrum between the light side and the dark side. Over time, this belief would shape the Order's expectations and fears. Some Jedi treated the prophecy as distant myth, an echo from an era when seers spoke in riddles. Others, such as masters who studied ancient holocrons, treated it as a solemn promise. If the Force could fall out of balance, then the Chosen One would be the remedy. Yet even as they meditated on peace, many quietly imagined that this figure would simply destroy the Sith and secure a final victory for the light. But the Force was not so simple. In the centuries leading up to Anakin's birth, the dark side had been growing in shadow. The Sith had been declared extinct, their empires shattered, their banners torn down. Yet the Jedi sensed a dimming of clarity. The Force felt clouded. Visions became harder to read. A subtle chill moved through the currents of time. Somewhere behind the scenes, a Sith Lord worked patiently, allowing the dark side to rise without open war, letting complacency sink into the Republic and its guardians. To many Jedi, balance meant triumph. The light side ascendant, the dark side erased. Yet within the deeper traditions, balance meant something harsher and more precise. It was not the domination of one aspect of the Force, but the end of a dangerous tilt. When the dark side swelled unchecked, corruption and tyranny followed. When the light side clung too rigidly to order and detachment, compassion could harden into dogma. True balance was the painful correction of extremes, a return to equilibrium no matter the cost. What followed was a quiet irony. Those who believed most strongly in the prophecy may have misunderstood how it would be fulfilled. If the dark side had entrenched itself at the highest levels of galactic power, then restoring balance might require more than a simple Sith defeat. It might demand the collapse of rotting institutions, the fall of both Sith and Jedi, and a reckoning neither side wished to face. And so, before anyone knew the name Anakin Skywalker, before a slave child ever stared up at twin suns or dreamed of starships, the Force was already moving. In hidden laboratories of destiny and choice, in the rising murmur of the dark side and the anxious meditations of the Jedi, a space was opening in history. Into that space, a child who did not yet exist was about to be born, and what the galaxy would find there would change everything. Born from nothing, Shmi Skywalker and a child without a father on the desert, world of Tatooine, where the twin suns burn the horizon into a pale, merciless blur, the story of Anakin Skywalker begins not with power or armies or the clash of Sith and Jedi, but with a single woman in a small, shadowed home. Her name is Shmi Skywalker. In a place ruled by crime lords and credits, she owns nothing, not even her own labor, yet she moves through each day with a quiet, unadvertised strength. Around her, the settlement of Mos Espa breathes in heat and dust. Metal scraps rust in open yards, vaporators tick and sigh, and the wind drives sand against every door. Shmi walks those packed streets as a slave, marked in records and in the casual commands of owners, yet in the dim coolness of her quarters, she is something else entirely. A mother who has decided that the harshness of Tatooine will not define her child. When asked about Anakin's father, Shmi gives an answer that unsettles even trained Jedi. There was no father. She carried him. She gave birth and she loved him. That is all. No great revelation, no elaborate myth, only a simple statement that hints at something far larger moving through the Force. For the Jedi, the implication is immediate. A child conceived without a father might be the one spoken of in ancient prophecy. For thousands of years, Jedi seers had whispered of a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force, ending the long hidden conflict between dark side and light side. To them, Anakin's immaculate style birth becomes evidence, a sign that destiny itself has intervened. To Shmi, it is different. For her, this miracle is measured in sleepless nights, in soft words after nightmares, in the small hand that curls into hers when the desert wind howls. Anakin's earliest years unfold in this tension between cosmic mystery and daily survival. The ground beneath his bare feet is hot, grains of sand slipping between his toes as he runs errands through the market. The air hums with the constant buzz of machinery. Pod racer, engines being tuned, droids complaining in binary, power couplings crackling in Watto's cluttered shop. Around him, the cruelty of ownership is casual, almost routine. Orders barked, threats muttered. Freedom always somewhere beyond the next June. Yet in that backroom workshop, surrounded by broken parts and discarded junk, a small boy dreams of the stars. He fixes what others throw away, coaxing life out of useless metal, building droids from scrap and imagining vessels that could rise effortlessly above Tatooine's prison of sand. What followed was not yet galactic war or the rise of an empire, but the quiet formation of a mind that refuses to accept limits. Over time, those dreams would shape far more than one life. While distant Jedi debate prophecy in cool temples, the Chosen One crawls under workbenches, hands blackened with grease, eyes lifted whenever a starship roars overhead. He does not know that the Force has already marked him, that travelers from the Republic will soon step into that sun-bleached street, and what they find there would change everything. Under Tatooine's suns, a slave boy who dreamed of stars, under the twin suns of Tatooine, power meant something very small and very immediate. Enough water for the day, enough credits to avoid a beating, enough shade to keep skin from burning under the pale, merciless sky. Yet in a cramped junk shop near Mos Espa's dusty streets, a boy who owned nothing quietly dreamed of the entire galactic sky. Watto's shop was a refuge and a prison. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of oil and scorched metal, a dense metallic warmth that dulled the edge of the noon heat. The twin suns blazed outside, but their fury was dimmed by patched canopies and grimy windows, turning the interior into a world of muted shadows and soft humming machinery. Shelves sagged under tangled droid limbs, cracked motivators, and half-melted power couplings. In this maze of forgotten parts, a small figure moved with careful focus. Anakin Skywalker worked there, bare feet scuffing across the sand-dusted floor, hands stained with grease, movements precise beyond his years. When a evaporator farmer limped in with a broken pump, the boy listened more than Watto did, tracing the damage with gentle fingers, suggesting a cheaper fix that would actually hold. When off-world traders complained about a sluggish astromech, he crawled into access panels, rerouting power feeds with quiet ingenuity until lights flickered back to life. These were small acts, but over time they revealed a mind that saw patterns others missed. In the back room, away from Watto's sharp eyes, another project grew. From discarded plating, mismatched servos, and abandoned processors, Anakin was secretly assembling a protocol droid. Its golden shell was incomplete, wires still exposed, photoreceptors flickering uncertainly. This was C-3PO, built not for war or profit, but to help his mother with chores, to lift burdens from hands already worn raw by labor. In a world where ownership ran only one way, this act of mercy would reshape galactic history in ways no one there could yet imagine. Yet even as he built, the chains remained. Beneath the skin of every slave on Tatooine lay the threat of an explosive chip, an invisible collar that turned disobedience into death. Anakin knew that running too far, resisting too strongly, meant more than punishment. It meant his body was never truly his own. That quiet terror, the knowledge that others decided where he slept, when he ate, whether he lived, would shape his hunger for control in years to come. How could someone raised without agency ever fully trust surrender to the light side of the Force? To endure, he dreamed. He watched pod racers scream across the desert, engines howling, metal blurring into streaks of color as they knifed through Beggar's Canyon. No human should have been able to fly them, yet he felt the currents of motion before they happened, sensing every shift and danger, as if the Force whispered in his ear. At night, he gazed up at the stars and imagined slipping their bonds, flying free of sand and chains, certain he was meant for something more than scrap and slavery. The story of Anakin's fall begins in that contrast, a gentle heart and a trapped life, kindness growing in the shadow of control and fear. Days blurred together in the dim light of Watto's shop, an endless cycle of repairs, bargains, and quiet dreams. And then, on an ordinary afternoon, as dust swirled in the doorway and the suns burned beyond, a robed stranger and a disguised queen stepped inside. What followed was no longer ordinary at all, and Anakin Skywalker's path would never again belong only to himself. Strangers in the dust, Qui-Gon, Padme, and a chance encounter. The door hissed closed behind them, muting the distant roar of the sandstorm until it became a low, constant breath against the walls. Outside, Tatooine raged. Inside, Watto's cluttered shop. The air was still, heavy with dust, oil, and the faint metallic tang of old power cells. Robes and royal fabrics did not belong in that dim little space, yet there stood a tall Jedi, a hidden queen in plain clothes, and a nervous Gungan dripping sand onto the floor. The contrast was quiet but absolute. The stranger's tunic was clean, his manner calm, his presence steady in the Force. Padme's movements were careful, her eyes taking in every broken droid and scattered part with the practiced attention of someone used to courts and councils, not junkyards. Around them stretched shelves of forgotten machines, the discarded skeletons of a galactic age that had moved on without ever glancing at Tatooine. From behind the counter, a boy stepped forward. Small, sun-browned, dressed in rough homespun, Anakin Skywalker greeted them with a politeness that did not match the brutality of his circumstances. His curiosity came first, bright and unguarded. He asked who they were, where they had come from, whether they were here to buy or fix, not to pry, but because strangers from the stars were rare and wondrous, in a life measured in chores and credits. When his gaze settled on Padme, something gentler surfaced. He noticed the way the sand clung to her boots, the faint strain in her face from the storm, the way her hands rested, uncertain, on the edge of the counter. Without hesitation, he offered help, shelter, and even a place to stay, asking for nothing in return. In a world ruled by profit and power, this act of mercy would reshape galactic history in ways no one in that room could yet imagine. Qui-Gon watched. The Jedi Master had moved through war zones and courts, through temples and battlefields, but here in this small shop, the Force whispered more insistently than it had in many great halls. He saw the boy's quick reflexes as Anakin snatched a tool from mid-air before it fell. He felt the boy's intuition as Anakin guessed the nature of their problem before they fully explained it. There was no training behind those instincts, only a raw, natural connection to the light side that pressed against the edges of the moment. As Anakin and Padme spoke, an early bond began to form, fragile and simple. He admired her as someone kind, someone who listened to him as more than property. She answered his questions with warmth, letting him speak of podresses and dreams of freeing slaves, of seeing every star in the sky. The story of Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala began not with declarations or destiny, but with shared glances in a dusty shop and the soft discovery that each saw the other as more than their station. In that cramped room, threads were quietly tied together, the politics of a hidden queen, the intuition of a maverick Jedi, the compassion of a slave boy who should have been broken but was not. What followed was a chain of choices that would shape empires, ignite conflict between dark side and light side, and echo through the history of the Sith and the Jedi. For now, it was only a storm, a shelter, and a meeting among strangers in the dust. Yet what they found there would change everything, and the Force was already moving them toward the next step. Racing for freedom, the pod race, and a boy's first victory. In the quiet that followed the storm on Tatooine, destiny narrowed to something deceptively simple, a race. Not a battle between Sith and Jedi, not yet, but a contest of speed and nerve in the desert where the Force would whisper through engines and sand instead of sabers and starships. On Tatooine, the Boonta Eve Classic pod race was infamous. It was a spectacle of danger, dominated by non-human pilots whose reflexes could match the brutal pace. Humans were considered too slow, too fragile. Yet in this harsh corner of the galactic rim, a single human child stood among towering machines and seasoned racers. Anakin Skywalker, a slave with a mechanic's hands and a pilot's instincts, preparing to enter a sport where crashes were common and survival was never guaranteed. The pod race, in memory, becomes softer than it was in reality. The roar of engines, which shook the arena, drifts here as a distant hum. The scream of turbines and repulsor lifts blends into a low, continuous vibration, a background thrum of power. Canyon walls, which in truth rush past in a lethal blur, become a muted ribbon of color at the edge of awareness. The sense of speed remains, but the violence of it fades, replaced by the feeling of air pressing against a cockpit, the gentle pull of turns, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat aligning with the Force. Around this quieted storm of motion, another wager unfolded. Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi who listened more to the living Force than to councils and rules, saw in Anakin something rare. Reflexes that bordered on precognition, a calm in the middle of chaos, a child conceived without a father, tied to an ancient prophecy. What followed was a decision that would shape more than one life. Qui-Gon gambled everything he could, the ship that had brought them, their chance to leave, and most importantly, Anakin's freedom. To the boy, it was simpler. He wanted to help his new friends escape, to fix a broken ship, to prove he could do what no one believed a human could. When the race began, Anakin's cockpit became a small world of focus. He felt the subtle shifts of the pod racer, the tug of each engine, the invisible currents of the Force guiding his hands. Around him, rivals crashed and faltered, but his path threaded through debris and dust. A slave child outflew professionals and criminals, crossing the finish line ahead of the notorious Sebulba. In that moment, chains that had defined his entire existence fell away. Symbolically, this victory was more than a win on a scoreboard. It was proof that the limits on Anakin's life had been imposed from the outside, not from within. The galaxy had told him he was property. The race answered that he was possibility. Over time, this lesson would deepen into something darker, a conviction that he must never again be helpless, never again lose because others held power over him. Beneath the cheers and relief, another pattern emerged. Anakin had tasted what it meant to win when everything was at stake, to bend impossible odds to his will. That need to be the best, to escape defeat, would not fade. It would grow, fed by love, fear, and war, until the boy who won a race to gain his freedom stood on the edge of choices far more terrible than any desert gamble. The next test wouldn't be decided by engines and sand, but by the Jedi who claimed him, and the dark presence already watching from the shadows. A painful goodbye, leaving Shmi and Tatooine. Behind the Jedi's interest in the boy promised escape from chains, but freedom in the galaxy often arrives hand in hand with loss. Power in the Force can open doors that had always been sealed. Yet, what happens when the first door it opens leads away from the person most loved? For Anakin Skywalker, the answer was a quiet, shattering moment in a dusty Tatooine courtyard. In the aftermath of the pod race, Qui-Gon Jinn returned to the slave quarters with news that should have been pure victory. The bet had succeeded. The boy was free. No collar, no owner, no more orders from Watto. For a heartbeat, Anakin's world expanded beyond the twin suns, beyond the junk shop and the cramped room he shared with his mother. Then came the condition. Shmi would not be going with him. The transaction that changed his life ended at the edge of her chains. The story of that farewell was not one of screaming or collapse, but of restraint. Shmi understood the terms before her son did. She felt the pull of the moment, the way the Force seemed to gather around Anakin, hinting at destinies far beyond a desert world. She knew that if she clung to him, if she begged him to stay, his path might close. So she did something far harder than holding on. She let go. Shmi told him that the decision could not be made by fear. She spoke of the Jedi, of the chance to learn, to become more than a slave in someone else's empire of sand and scrap. Her belief in him was absolute. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history because it sent the future Darth Vader away from Tatooine with both a gift and a wound. Over time, that wound would deepen, but in that moment, it was only beginning to form. Anakin, still just a child, tried to bridge the impossible distance with a promise. He said he would come back. He would grow strong, become a Jedi, and return to free her. That vow would shape his heart for years, an unspoken contract with the Force itself. When Shmi later died in his arms, that promise, broken by time and war, twisted into rage and grief that the Jedi could not fully understand. The pattern was set. The early trauma of leaving his mother created a terror of loss that never left him. When visions of Padme's death haunted his dreams, they did not arrive in a vacuum. They echoed that first separation on Tatooine, the helplessness of walking away while someone beloved remained in danger. The Jedi taught acceptance, detachment, the idea that all beings return to the Force. To Anakin, it sounded like permission to abandon those he loved. As the transport's ramp lowered, the desert wind carried the smell of dust and engine exhaust. A small boy walked up into the starship, clutching a simple bundle, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. What followed was not triumph, but a quiet departure under harsh suns, with Shmi growing smaller in the distance. He carried hope for a new life among the Jedi, and a fresh, unseen wound that had barely begun to ache, a wound that the dark side was already waiting to exploit. The Temple in the clouds, arrival on Coruscant and Jeddah. Doubts in the quiet that followed that farewell on Tatooine. See, power changed its shape. It moved from the brutal certainty of chains and debts to something more mysterious, an invisible current that would shape a child's fate. The story of Anakin Skywalker's arrival on Coruscant began not with triumphal fanfare, but with the hum of a transport slipping into a sky that never truly slept. When the ship descended through the atmosphere of the galactic capital, Anakin pressed against the viewport. Below stretched an endless ocean of city lights. No horizon, no dunes, only layers upon layers of durasteel and transparasteel. Airspeeders traced glowing paths through the darkness, streams of motion that to him resembled fireflies scattered across an infinite night. On Tatooine, the stars had been distant, cold points above hot sand. Here, the stars seemed to have fallen, embedded in the world itself, promising power, wonder, and answers he did not yet know to ask for. Coruscant's noise faded as the Jedi Temple came into view. Set apart from the restless city, it rose in serene spires, a quiet fortress of the light side at the heart of a world driven by trade, politics, and unending movement. Within, its halls were wide and still, lit by soft glows instead of harsh suns. Children in simple robes practiced with training remotes, their motions disciplined and measured, so distant from the frantic survival of Mos Esper's streets. For a boy who had known shouting traders and roaring pod racers, the temple's silence felt immense, almost heavy. Yet in that stillness, the Jedi Council sensed a storm. When Anakin stood before them, small and uncertain, the masters around him felt the force swirl with uncommon intensity. They recognized extraordinary potential, a strength that in another time might have been greeted with uncomplicated welcome. Instead, caution took hold. He was too old for their tradition, too attached to his mother, and there was already a shadow, a faint but undeniable echo of the dark side clinging to his secret presence. Yoda's eyes closed as he reached into the current of the Force and found fear, loss, and anger buried under Anakin's hopeful answers. Mace Windu listened to the boy's words, but heard, beneath them, the raw edge of someone who had seen slavery and danger before understanding either. Their questions were meant as guidance, as a test shaped by centuries of conflict and hard lessons. To Anakin, they sounded colder, less concern, more suspicion. Not a welcome home, but a guarded threshold. What followed was a decision made on the edge of trust and doubt. Qui-Gon's death on Naboo removed the one Jedi who had seen Anakin not only as a prophecy, but as a person. Obi-Wan's promise to train him became a fragile bridge between the boy and an order already divided about his presence. Over time, that bridge would hold, but never comfortably. The Jedi accepted him, yet never completely embraced him. And in that narrow space between inclusion and distance, the dark side found room to whisper. Master and apprentice, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and an uneasy fit. In the quiet years that followed Naboo, that uneasy bridge became a training bond. Power draws connections together, but what happens when both sides of that connection are still unfinished? The answer is the story of a Padawan who became a master too soon, and a learner who never truly felt like a student. In the immediate aftermath of Qui-Gon's death, Obi-Wan Kenobi stepped across a threshold he had not expected to reach so quickly. Only hours before, he had still been a Padawan, chafing against his own master's unconventional faith in the boy from Tatooine. Now, with the Council's reluctant approval, he stood as Anakin's teacher, honoring a promise spoken over a dying man. What followed was a quiet transformation. Obi-Wan studied the code, the traditions, the examples of old masters, trying to shape himself into something steady enough for a child already marked by prophecy and fear. Around this time, in the training rooms and hangars of the Jedi Temple, Anakin Skywalker revealed just how unusual a Padawan he would be. His connection to the Force was raw and immediate. In lightsaber drills, he advanced with startling speed, turning practice sequences into fluid, aggressive forms that impressed even the Temple instructors. As a pilot, he seemed to merge with controls, guiding starfighters and speeders with the same instinct that had once carried him through pod races on Tatooine. Yet obedience did not come so easily. Rules about attachment, about patience, about stillness in meditation felt distant and restrictive to a boy who had known chains. The bond between master and apprentice took on the shape of an older and younger brother more than that of distant teacher and deferential student. On missions, they traded dry remarks in the middle of danger, Obi-Wan's measured caution set against Anakin's impulsive courage. When blaster fire erupted in a crowded street or negotiations collapsed into conflict, they moved together with practiced trust, each covering the other without a word. In quieter moments, Anakin confided memories of his mother, of sandstorms and night terrors. Obi-Wan answered with gentle reprimands, but also with small acts of kindness. Extra training sessions, shared meals, a hand on the shoulder after a harsh council review. Yet beneath that warmth, friction grew. Obi-Wan clung to the Jedi Code as a lifeline, believing that discipline would shape Anakin's immense power into service for the light side. Anakin, still haunted by loss, heard the code as another set of walls. He questioned orders, resented delays, pushed for action where his master counseled restraint. Each disagreement ended with outward obedience, but inside a quiet ledger of frustrations began to form. The council's stance only deepened this tension. Anakin was praised as the chosen one in hushed corridors, yet barred from certain knowledge and responsibilities until much later than his talents warranted. He was summoned for special evaluations, watched more closely than other Padawans, tested for anger, fear, and attachment, admired, but not trusted, exceptional, but isolated. Over time, that double message carved a hollow space in his heart where doubt could settle. In that space, the seeds of future tragedy lay waiting. The affection between Obi-Wan and Anakin was real, forged in shared battles and narrow escapes, in laughter on starship decks and quiet apologies after harsh words. But their unresolved arguments about risk, about mercy, about the meaning of strength, formed small cracks in the foundation of their bond. When war finally came to the Republic, those cracks would widen under the strain. The day on Mustafar, when master and apprentice clashed amid fire and ash, would not appear from nowhere. It would be the shattering of a relationship that had always held love and tension in equal measure, a final echo of lessons taught, misunderstood, and never fully healed. A senator and a Jedi, reuniting with Padme. Amid rising tension's power can bind people together as tightly as chains. But what happens when that power is not political authority or military strength, but affection forbidden by ancient vows? The answer is found in the quiet return of a senator and a Jedi to the same room after 10 long years. By the time Anakin Skywalker saw Padme Amidala again, the Galactic Republic was already beginning to fracture worlds, threatened to leave the Republic, and Count Dooku's Separatist movement grew in the shadows. In response, Padme, now a senator, opposed the creation of a grand army, fearing that war would only feed darker powers. Her stance made her a target. The assassination attempt on Coruscant that shattered her ship and killed her decoy reminded the Jedi Council that the conflict was no longer distant. It had reached the capital itself into this atmosphere. Anakin arrived as Obi-Wan's apprentice, assigned to protect the woman who had once knelt in the sands of Tatooine and comforted a frightened slave boy. What followed was not a simple reunion between old friends for Anakin. The memory of Padme had never faded. It had been polished in his mind over time until it became something almost mythic. When she stepped into the light of the briefing room, he saw not only a senator, but the echo of the first person beyond his mother, who had truly seen him. His reaction blended boyish crush with the first currents of adult desire. Awkward praise slipped out too quickly. His eyes lingered a moment too long. Yet beneath the surface ran something deeper, a connection forged years earlier, amid pod racers and desert sunsets, shared danger on Naboo, and the promise of a future he believed the Force had meant for him. The story of their bond was accelerated by memory. It skipped the slow stages of acquaintance and moved straight into intimacy as they fled another attempt on her life and hid on Naboo. Their shared experiences tightened. This bond duty placed them side by side, but it was the quiet moments that would shape everything. The sound of waves at Varikino, the confession of Anakin's pain over leaving his mother behind on Tatooine, the way Padme's resolve softened when she saw how much that child had carried on his shoulders. These were not grand battles, yet they were decisive, turning points. The Jedi Code forbade attachment, seeing it as a path to fear and possession. Anakin knew this. He repeated the teachings, even as his heart rebelled. The Order expected him to serve the light side without personal ties, while Padme was sworn to her people and to the fragile peace of the Republic. But on Naboo, she began to see him, not as the boy from the desert, but as a man, passionate, intense, and deeply loyal. Their decision to step across that invisible line, to turn affection into a secret promise, did not announce itself with fanfare. It settled around them quietly, a hidden vow beneath. Formal titles from that moment, love and fear, became intertwined in Anakin's heart. Fear of losing her, fear of a galaxy sliding into war. Fear that the Jedi and the Senate could not protect what mattered most, and in the shadows beyond their lakeside refuge, another figure watched this growing attachment with great interest, waiting for the moment when it could be turned into a weapon. Back to the dunes, Shmi's fate, and the birth of Anakin's rage. Love had become a promise and a threat in Anakin's mind, a source of comfort and a source of terror. But what happens when that terror begins to speak through the Force in restless sleep? The answer is the nightmares over time. Anakin's dreams changed. At first, they had been memories of Tatooine, harsh suns and coarse sand, the small figure of his mother fading into the distance as a Jedi starship rose into the sky. Then the images darkened. He saw Shmi in chains, heard distant screams, felt her presence through the Force flicker in and out. As if drowning, these were not ordinary dreams. They carried the cold weight of warning on Naboo. In the quiet, after secret vows, his sleep became a battlefield. He woke breathless, convinced that somewhere across the galactic rim, his mother was in pain. The Jedi taught detachment. They urged patience and trust in the will of the Force. But the story of Anakin Skywalker was already bending away from that discipline. In defiance of orders, he broke from his duty to protect Padme on Coruscant and flew with her toward the desert world that had shaped them both. When their ship descended onto Tatooine, the past returned in layers. The old slave quarters, the memory of Watto's cluttered shop, the sense of being owned by others still hung in the air. But what they found there would change everything. Watto had sold Shmi years before to a moisture farmer named Cliegg Lars, and this man had done something almost unheard of. On that world, he had freed her and married her for a brief time. Shmi had known peace. At the Lars homestead, Anakin met Cliegg Owen and Beru, the family his mother had built in his absence. Their words cut deeper than any blade. Tusken raiders had taken Shmi from the outskirts of the farm. Cliegg's injuries and missing leg told the rest of the story in silence. The Tuskens had always been a presence in Tatooine's history, a harsh people, surviving in a harsh land. But for Anakin, they became something else, a target for all his fear. What followed was a desperate ride into the desert, Anakin alone on a speeder bike, racing through the night, twin moons above his cloak, snapping in the wind, the Force stretched out before him, a single thread leading to a Tusken camp. When he arrived, he moved through the shadows past crude tents and flickering fires until he found her bound, beaten, barely conscious, yet still reaching for him with the same gentle love she had shown in a slave hovel. Years before, she died in his arms, her last words a blessing, his name spoken with pride. Then silence. Something inside him broke, not with a shout, but with a terrible stillness. The light side receded, and the dark side rushed in to fill the emptiness. What followed was not a battle, but a storm. He killed the warriors, then the women, then the children. Every living being in that village fell beneath his blade, guided not by strategy, but by a fog of rage and grief. When the fury ebbed, he returned to the homestead and confessed everything to Padme Ewis, his voice shaking between anger and shame. He said they were animals, and that he had slaughtered them all, not just the men, but the women and the children as well. Instead of recoiling, Padme tried to soothe him, insisting that he was only human, that his pain was understandable in her attempt to comfort him. She reinforced a dangerous idea that love and loss could excuse atrocities committed in their name. This moment would shape his path as deeply as any prophecy, and in the shadows of the Clone Wars that lay ahead, the memory of the Tusken camp lingered a quiet proof that Anakin Skywalker had already chosen the dark once and might choose it again. War begins, the arena, the clones, and a secret marriage. That memory followed him to Geonosis. A quiet shadow beneath the roar of an arena built for death power corrupts. But what happens when that power is placed in the hands of a frightened young Jedi whose heart is already divided between duty and forbidden love? The answer is the story of Anakin Skywalker. At the moment the Clone Wars ignite, captured in the droid foundries and dragged into the execution arena, Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan are chained to pillars under a blood-red sky. The crowd howls for spectacle, yet what follows was something more intimate. Three figures facing death together. Anakin reaches for the Force Padme, reaches for a hidden lockpick. Obi-Wan reaches for calm and humor to steady them all. Their shared courage in those final moments, before the beasts are released, deepens everything friendship, duty, and a love that the Jedi Code would never sanction. When the chains fall and the creatures charge, the arena becomes a storm of motion. Padme scrambling up a pillar, Anakin riding a reek, Obi-Wan fighting with nothing but timing and nerve. It seems they will be overwhelmed. Then blue lightsabers ignite across the Sands ranks of Jedi, emerge from the shadows of the stands, and for a heartbeat, it appears this will be a simple rescue. Instead, what followed was the opening blow of a galactic war. Gunships descend through dust and flame, bearing white-armored soldiers bred for conflict. The Grand Army of the Republic revealed in an instant. What they found there would change everything for the Jedi Order. The clones move with precise coordination, pouring blaster fire into droid ranks as walkers and gunships turn the arena into a battlefield. Anakin is in the center of it all, leaping from transport to transport, chasing Count Dooku through a haze of smoke and falling debris. In the hangar beyond the chaos, Anakin faces Dooku. With Obi-Wan at his side, arrogance and anger drive him forward. He rushes in against an old master of the dark side and pays the price. Dooku's blade cuts through his defenses, shearing away Anakin's right arm in a single brutal stroke. The pain is blinding the dual ends with Yoda's arrival, but the damage is done. The new mechanical hand he receives afterward is quiet symbolism, a first step toward becoming more machine than man, a mark that war and the dark will carve into him again and again over time. After the battle, the galaxy marches toward total war, while on Naboo a different vow is spoken, far from Coruscant's eyes, on a serene lakeside terrace. Anakin and Padme stand before a simple officiant with only C, 3, P, O, and R, 2D, 2 as witnesses. The sun sets over the water, soft light side. Beauty wrapped around a secret that could destroy his standing as a Jedi. This marriage brings Anakin real joy, a fragile harbor against the storm he has unleashed. Yet it also deepens his fear of loss and his conviction that the Jedi will never truly understand him. In binding himself to Padme in secret, he tightens the very chain that will one day pull him toward the Sith and the armor of Darth Vader, the hero of the Clone Wars. Glory, trauma, and growing doubt. That secret marriage becomes the quiet center of Anakin's world, even as the galaxy begins to tear itself apart. Power has always frightened the Jedi when it burns too brightly in one person. But what happens when that power is thrown into a galactic war with no end in sight? The answer is the story of Anakin Skywalker as a general in the Clone Wars. From the first days of the conflict, Anakin is pushed to the front lines. Around the dusty fields of Geonosis, the frigid skies of Orta Plutonia, and the burning cities of Christophsis, he leads from the very tip of the spear. His strategies are daring to the point of recklessness, turning hopeless defenses into sudden, stunning victories. To clone troopers bred for obedience, this commander, who remembers their names and fights in the mud beside them, becomes a symbol of hope. Civilians on liberated worlds whisper about the heroic Jedi who refuses to abandon them. In the midst of this rising legend, the Council assigns him a Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. What follows is a partnership that surprises everyone. At first, she is brash, impatient, and unafraid to challenge him. Her lightness and humor balance his intensity, and in teaching her, some of his sharpest edges begin to soften. He shows her how to survive the chaos of war. She, in turn, reminds him of compassion, of small kindnesses to frightened children and exhausted soldiers. Yet the war itself begins to poison that compassion. Over time, the endless march of battles brings loss after loss. Squads of clones vanish in fire and smoke. Trusted allies turn traitor. Political leaders manipulate the conflict for their own gain. Each betrayal drives another crack through Anakin's faith in the Republic and in the Jedi Council that serves it. Their calm detachment, once admirable, starts to feel cold in the face of so much suffering. On worlds such as Ryloth and Nelvan, Anakin faces choices that drag him toward the edge of the light side. There are moments of deep mercy when he spares enemies who surrender or risks everything to rescue a single captured friend. There are also flashes of terrible anger when someone he loves is threatened and he feels helpless. In those moments, his strikes come faster, his voice hardens, and the dark side of the Force presses closer. These years as a celebrated general would shape him more than any lesson in the Temple. His decisiveness, his fierce emotional bonds, his refusal to accept defeat make him brilliant in open conflict. They also make him vulnerable to a different kind of war, one for his soul, waged not on battlefields but in shadows and whispered promises that are already beginning to surround him. Ahsoka's departure, betrayal, disillusionment, and a cracked faith. War changes warriors, but what happens when the deepest wound is not dealt by an enemy army, but by those sworn to stand beside a Jedi for life? The answer is the story of Ahsoka Tano's departure and the quiet fracture it carves through Anakin Skywalker's faith. Near the end of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Temple itself becomes a battlefield. A bomb tears through the temple hangar, killing clones and civilians, and shattering the illusion that Coruscant is beyond the front lines. What followed was an investigation that should have been routine. Instead, it becomes a slow, tightening noose around Anakin's Padawan, Ahsoka. Evidence is planted, security footage manipulated, and a trusted friend, Barriss Offee, moves in the shadows while the Order begins to suspect its own. As explosions echo in the galactic media, the Jedi Council faces pressure to appear decisive. And in that pressure, Anakin watches something subtle and chilling. The Council turns from careful seekers of truth into nervous guardians of reputation. Ahsoka is arrested, imprisoned, and then escapes in desperation, hunted through the underlevels of Coruscant as a traitor to the Republic and the Jedi Order. She has served since childhood. Anakin refuses to accept this. He chases, leads the Council, overlooks, confronts. Asajj Ventress in the depths of the city and follows the currents of the Force toward a different answer. Over time, his frustration grows. Meetings with the Council become strained. Their words are measured, their tone distant. They speak of protocol and perception, while Anakin speaks of loyalty and trust. He sees that they are more concerned with how the Order appears during war than with the possibility that an innocent Padawan has been condemned. The turning point comes when Anakin unmasks Barriss in front of the Council, exposing her as the true bomber and the architect of the frame that nearly destroyed Ahsoka. This should be a moment of relief. Instead, it becomes something far more painful. Ahsoka is brought back in chains and then suddenly vindicated. The Council offers apologies and a place among them as a full Jedi Knight, as though the terror and betrayal can be smoothed over with a promotion. Ahsoka steps forward, listens, and then closes her hand around the small braid that marks her as a Padawan. She places it in Anakin's palm and chooses to walk away from the Jedi Order. The temple corridors are quiet, but inside Anakin a storm gathers. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. If she stays, perhaps his path bends differently, but she does not stay for Anakin. The message is unmistakable. The Jedi can abandon even the most devoted when fear and politics intrude. Loyalty is not always returned. Trust is conditional. And the Order's embrace can vanish the moment it becomes inconvenient. A small invisible line has been crossed. He still fights. Their war still carries a blue blade for the light side. But a part of his heart has already stepped away, and in that empty space, something else is waiting to enter. A friendly Chancellor. Palpatine's long, patient manipulation into that empty space steps a gentle voice in rich senatorial robes, a man who smiles with tired warmth and calls Anakin, "my boy," while the rest of Coruscant sees a harried Chancellor drowning in petitions and debates. Anakin encounters something very different behind closed doors. Palpatine is never too busy, never too distracted. The galactic leader who cannot spare a minute for entire star systems somehow always has an evening free for a single troubled Jedi Knight over time. Their meetings become a quiet ritual between missions and council briefings. Anakin walks the polished corridors of the Senate rather than the austere halls of the Temple. In public, Palpatine plays the role of kindly statesman, praising the Jedi as guardians of peace. In private, his tone softens further. He listens as Anakin speaks of frustration, fear, and doubt, then answers with reassurance that feels almost paternal. This is the story of a politician who understands that real power is won in whispers, not in speeches. Palpatine tells Anakin that his abilities are extraordinary, beyond even the greatest Jedi Masters. He wonders aloud why the Council hesitates to grant him the rank of Master, why the hero of the Clone War is not trusted with full authority when Anakin confesses resentment. Palpatine does not correct him. He agrees, gently hinting that the Order fears what it cannot control. This subtle validation would shape Anakin's sense of injustice. The suggestion that the Jedi are not only cautious, but self-serving, begins as a murmur and grows in one conversation over the sweeping lights of Coruscant. Palpatine speaks of the Republic's endless conflict. He laments a Senate paralyzed by procedure, a Jedi Order bound by ancient dogma. Then he offers a different vision. What if the Republic had strong leadership, a single will to cut through chaos and end war decisively? His words are not framed as tyranny, but as mercy. He insists that with enough power, one could protect the innocent, prevent suffering before it begins. Then comes a pattern. Interrupt a story that does not sound Sith at all. Palpatine shares the tragedy of Darth Plague, is the wiser Sith Lord who could use the Force to keep the ones he cared about from dying. What followed was a seed buried deep in Anakin's fears, the idea that the dark side might hold the key to saving those he loves, that forbidden knowledge might be compassion, not corruption. Anakin hears in these talks something he has never fully received from the Jedi: unconditional affirmation. The Council offers rules, Obi-Wan offers duty, Padme offers love, but Palpatine offers understanding. He never dismisses Anakin's anger. He never calls his attachments a weakness. Instead, he frames them as noble, the very reason the galaxy needs him. By the time suspicion finally stirs, when Palpatine reveals too much about the Sith, the emotional hooks are already set. Anakin is not choosing between Jedi and monster, but between an order that doubts him and a mentor who has always believed in him. The next step will not feel like betrayal. It will feel inevitable. Visions of loss, Padmé's pregnancy, and the fear of death. Trust is a fragile thing in the Jedi Order and in Anakin Skywalker. That trust has already begun to crack. Yet in the middle of galactic war and political conflict, his life takes an unexpectedly gentle turn. It begins not with a battle, but with a whisper in a quiet Coruscant apartment removed from the Senate chambers and the Jedi Temple. Padmé waits by the window, wrapped in soft shadows, when Anakin returns from the front lines. He expects another mission, another argument about duty instead. She tells him 3 simple words that change everything. She is pregnant. The story of Anakin Skywalker's fall passes through this moment of almost ordinary joy. For a heartbeat, the war vanishes. No clones, no Sith, no councils, only the promise of a child. His face lights with a happiness rarely seen since his days as a boy on Tatooine. This secret marriage now promises a secret family. Yet beneath the joy, anxiety coils tightly. Their love is forbidden, their bond concealed from the Jedi and the Senate. An open family would expose everything, so the future that should feel bright already carries a dark edge of fear over time. That fear takes form in the Force one night. Anakin's sleep is broken by a vision. Padmé on a medical table, her face pale, her breath shallow hands reaching for him as her life slips away. The dream is vivid, not a vague impression, but a brutal sequence of images. He wakes, shaking, calling her name, the echo of another desert world pressing in on his mind. Years earlier, he dreamed of his mother suffering on Tatooine. Those visions drove him to her, only to find her dying in his arms. Now, the Force shows him Padmé in the same helpless agony, and what followed was a resurgence of old trauma and buried rage. The pattern is unbearable. First his mother, now his wife. The only 2 women who ever offered him unconditional love, both framed by the same prophetic horror. The Jedi teach that such visions are warnings, not certainties. They speak of the Force as a current that reveals possibilities, not fixed endpoints. Masters urge calm observation, acceptance of loss, as part of the living Force. To them, attachment is dangerous precisely because it makes surrender to grief so difficult. But for Anakin, this calm acceptance feels indistinguishable from abandonment. How can a guardian of peace stand by? While destiny threatens to take everything in his mind, 2 paths begin to form. One follows the Jedi way. Trust the Force, release fear, accept that even Padmé might die. The other whispers of forbidden power. The dark side promises that destiny can be broken, that death itself can be challenged. What they found there would change. Everything is a thought that begins to cling to the idea of secret Sith knowledge. And as Anakin stares out over the Coruscant skyline, the choice between light side surrender and dark side control quietly becomes the axis on which his entire future will turn. The tragedy of Darth Plagueis, a story that opens a door. Power promises control over what the galaxy fears most: loss and death. But what happens when that promise is whispered, not in a temple or a war room, but in a theater? The answer is the story of a Sith temptation wrapped in an opera on Coruscant. The galaxy's opera house glows against the night, a monument to culture rising from a world of politics. Inside, the air is dim and cool. Translucent dancers of water and light twist above the stage in silent, impossible shapes. The performance is grand, almost alien. Yet in one of the private viewing boxes, the true drama is quiet. 2 figures sit close together, Chancellor Palpatine and Anakin Skywalker, speaking in low measured tones, while the galactic elite look on without hearing. What followed was not a threat or a command, but a story. Palpatine leans slightly toward Anakin's voice, softened by the music. He speaks of an old legend whispered in the corridors of power, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord who studied the Force, not for glory in war, but to bend life and death themselves. plague is learn to influence midi-chlorians, to create life, to keep those he cared about from dying, to reach into the current of the Force and hold it still for Anakin. This is not abstract history. It is a knife turned gently in an open wound. Visions of Padmé's death already haunt his sleep, echoing the loss of his mother on Tatooine. The Jedi teach acceptance. The light side urges surrender to fate. But Palpatine's tale suggests another path, a dark side that does not bow to destiny, but strangles it, a power that would shape the future instead of enduring it over time. Palpatine's phrasing has grown more careful, more precise. He never says the word Sith in accusation. He never admits to training under such a master. Instead, he lets the implications hang in the air. He hints that this knowledge exists, that it is not found in any Jedi archive, that perhaps with the right guidance, such secrets might be learned. He presents the dark side not as an empire of monsters, but as a hidden art reserved for those strong enough to claim it. Anakin listens, torn between duty and desperation. The hum of conversation around them fades. The strange opera becomes a distant blur. Only the promise remains, the idea that somewhere beyond the Jedi Code, there might be a way to save Padmé. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history if it were real, and if he were willing to pay the price when the performance ends. Anakin rises and steps out into the Coruscant night. The city roars beneath him, but his thoughts are very still. One question now echoes louder than any engine. What if the dark side is the only way to save the person he loves most? And if that door has opened even a fraction, what waits on the other side is about to reach for him, spy on a friend, the Council's request, and a shattered trust in the days that follow that quiet performance on Coruscant. Anakin returns to the Jedi Temple with a new weight in his thoughts. The Council feels it even if they cannot name it directly. The Force around him is restless, and the galactic war has entered a phase where every decision carries the shadow of something darker. For years, the Jedi have watched Chancellor Palpatine gather power, emergency decrees, extended terms, new security measures, each one justified by the Clone War, each one drawing more authority away from the Senate and toward a single office. What happens when a democracy pours its fear into one man and never takes it back? The Council has begun to suspect the answer behind closed doors. Mace, Windu, Yoda, and the other masters speak in careful, measured tones. They sense a presence in the dark side, coiled around the Chancellor's office. They know the Sith are involved, but not yet how or where. Their conclusion is simple and chilling. If Palpatine refuses to surrender his emergency powers, when the war ends, the Republic itself may fall under a quiet empire, ruled from his chair to counter this threat. They choose a weapon that feels to them both logical and dangerous. They choose Anakin Skywalker. They grant him something unprecedented, a seat on the Jedi Council. For one, so young the story of the Order would say this is an honor that would shape his future. But what followed was not honor at all when Anakin enters the council chamber and hears the decision. His heart surges for a moment. This is what he has longed for. Recognition, a sign that his power and his victories in the war have finally been acknowledged. Then the words continue, and the tone shifts. He will sit on the council, but he will not be granted the rank of master in Jedi tradition. The denial is more than administrative. It is a public statement that he is still not trusted, still not fully one of them. The slight cut. Deeper than the council understands over time, a pattern has formed in Anakin's mind. The Order holds him back. Palpatine encourages him forward. The contrast grows sharper with every breath. Then comes the true request spoken in that same calm chamber voice. Anakin is asked to report on the Chancellor's actions, his private meetings, his intentions, his secrets. In essence, the Jedi ask him to spy on the one authority figure who has always seemed to trust him completely, to betray a mentor who calls him friend. The conflict inside him ignites loyalty to the Jedi who freed him from slavery and trained him in the light side collides with loyalty to the man who promises to help him save Padmé. The Council's secrecy, turns this mission into something that feels less like duty and more like manipulation. He is being used as a tool, not treated as an equal over time. This moment becomes a pivot in Anakin's destiny. In trying to guard against the dark side, the Jedi inadvertently drive him into its arms. Their fear of Palpatine seems to confirm everything the Chancellor has whispered, that the Jedi are hypocritical, that they crave power, that they will move against the Senate itself. And as Anakin walks out of the council chamber, the path ahead narrows toward a choice that will soon be forced into the open, revealed. I am the Sith. And a choice. Deferred power reveals itself most clearly in quiet rooms, not on the battlefield, but in offices and council chambers where a single conversation can redirect galactic history. The story of Anakin's final crossroads begins in one such room as the sun dips low over Coruscant and shadows stretch across the Chancellor's private office. He enters expecting reassurance. Instead, what follows is revelation. Palpatine's voice is calm, almost gentle. He speaks of the force of the dark side of legends. The Jedi refuse to teach. And then, without raising his tone, he names himself Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord the Council has hunted through years of war. There is no duel, no explosion, only the soft shattering of certainty. Anakin's reaction is not simple rage. It is a collision of loyalty, horror, and desperate hope. The man who guided his career, who championed him before the Senate, now stands, revealed as the enemy. The Jedi feared, yet in the same breath, Palpatine reaches for Anakin's deepest wound. He speaks of Padme, of the visions of her death that haunt Anakin's sleep, and he offers what the Jedi never dared promise, the power to prevent that loss over time. Palpatine has studied every fracture in Anakin's faith. He presses on them. Now he frames the Jedi as conspirators, plotting to overthrow the Republic, claiming they will move against the Senate, seize control, and end democracy in the name of order. The accusations echo the Council's secrecy, their refusal to grant Anakin the rank of Master, their demand that he spy on the very man now standing before him. Expectation suggests Anakin should strike then, and there ignite his E-blade and end the Sith Lord's influence. Instead, there is only stillness, an agonizing pause. He holds his weapon but does not use it. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history if it became execution. Yet he cannot choose, not yet. The dark side whispers of Padme's survival. The light side demands justice, and he stands paralyzed between them. Finally, he turns away from the Chancellor and walks out into the corridor. The choice deferred. He goes to Mace Windu Anakin's. Report is urgent controlled. He reveals that Palpatine is the Sith Lord, that the war itself has been guided by the same hand that claimed to save the Republic. In that moment, he still believes there might be a path where Padme lives. The Jedi prevail, and the Empire never rises. Mace departs with a strike team. Anakin is ordered to remain behind to let the Council handle what they found there would change everything. Instead, he waits alone in the Council chamber. The city, bathed in orange light speeders, drift far below. The temple towers as the sun sinks over Coruscant. Anakin stares through the transparastile into the widening dusk, knowing that whatever happens in the Chancellor's office now will shape not only his fate, but the fate of the entire galaxy. The moment of fall. Mace, Windu, Sidious, and a fatal decision. Power reveals itself most clearly in moments of crisis. But what happens when that power is balanced on a single choice between duty and love? The answer is the story of Anakin's fall in the Chancellor's office on Coruscant, outside the sun has nearly set over the galactic capital. The orange glow that bathed the Jedi Temple now bleeds into deepening shadow in the Chancellor's private chamber. Mace Windu confronts Palpatine not as a politician, but as a Sith Lord revealed. The quiet formality of an arrest shatters. In an instant, Palpatine's hidden blade flashes. 4 Jedi Masters fall in seconds, and what followed was a duel of raw power, purple and crimson light tearing through the dim office as the storm outside begins to answer the conflict within. Over time, Mace Windu has earned a reputation as one of the Order's greatest warriors. His mastery of Varpad walking the knife edge near the dark side now collides with the full fury of Darth Sidious. Their sabers crash across the transparent steel windows until Mace gains the advantage. He disarms the Chancellor, drives him to the floor, and turns Sidious's own lightning back upon him. The room fills with the stench of ozone. The Emperor-to-be writhes and screams his face, twisting under the reflected energy. It is at this breaking point that Anakin arrives breathless from the temple corridors. He steps into a scene that seems to confirm every whispered warning Palpatine has planted. For years, a Jedi Master standing over an unarmed, weakened leader blade, raised for the kill. The Chancellor's voice is hoarse and desperate, insisting the Jedi are taking over, insisting this is a coup. The Jedi Council's earlier mistrust now looks, to Anakin, less like caution and more like betrayal. From Anakin's perspective, the light side and the dark side have traded places. Mace speaks of duty and necessary action, but Anakin hears only a death sentence for the one being who promised the power to stop Padmé's fate. He pleads for mercy, demands that Palpatine stand trial, begs Mace to wait, because in his mind, killing the Chancellor will destroy any chance to learn the secret that has haunted his dreams, the power to save her. Mace refuses. He raises his blade for a final stroke, and in that split second, Anakin's entire life narrows to a single choice. The Jedi Order on one side, Padmé's life on the other. His blue saber ignites and sweeps through the air, severing Mace's hand. The redirected lightning hurls the Jedi Master through the shattered window into the night. His fall is silent against the endless cityscape. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. In the sudden quiet, Anakin stares at the place where Mace vanished, horror and realization settling over him. There is no war to explain this, no mission to justify it, only a friend struck down. So a Sith may live. Palpatine rises slowly, voice now smooth and commanding again. He names Anakin Darth Vader, promising that together they will uncover every dark secret of the Force. Anakin kneels not in triumph or hatred of the Jedi, but in terror of losing the one person he cannot live without. And with that kneeling, the galaxy's future tilts fully toward the dark. Order 66, the temple burns and the Jedi, our hunted power, can promise salvation even as it opens the door to ruin. And in the quiet after Anakin kneels, that promise hardens into command. Palpatine rises from the floor of his office and turns toward the galactic war he has orchestrated for years. With a single measured breath, he reaches for a hidden protocol buried deep in the minds of the clone armies. Then, in a calm voice, he speaks the words that will end an era. Execute Order 66. For years, the clones had fought beside the Jedi, sharing rations, transports, and narrow escapes. The story of their loyalty seemed simple, but hidden beneath that camaraderie was a layer of programming, a contingency woven into their very creation. At the sound of that code, something shifts. The same soldiers who once rushed forward to shield their Jedi generals from blaster fire now turn almost in the same motion and raise their rifles. There is no dramatic speech, no argument, only confusion and a sudden, hollow silence in the Force as bonds of trust snap all across the galaxy. On distant worlds, the betrayal unfolds in small, intimate tragedies. A Jedi leading a charge on a rain-soaked battlefield feels the warning in the Force a heartbeat too late. Another, meditating aboard a cruiser between hyperspace jumps, opens their eyes to see familiar armor aiming back at them. In forests, on city streets, in the corridors of starships, the pattern repeats. Those who spent their lives defending the Republic are cut down by those they once called brothers. Over time, historians would list campaigns and casualties, but in that moment, what followed was a sudden, crushing isolation. Each Jedi dying convinced that the Order had somehow vanished around them. Back on Coruscant, the temple stands serene against the dusk, its spires catching the fading light side of the setting sun. Then, Over the skyline, blue-marked gunships approach, carrying the 501st Legion. At their head walks Anakin Skywalker, now named Darth Vader, cloak trailing behind him. The blue of their armor moves in disciplined lines through the temple's open halls, a military column invading a sanctuary that had for thousands of years trained guardians of the light side. Every polished floor, every quiet statue of past Jedi becomes a witness. Inside, younglings gather, sensing confusion but not yet understanding its shape. Anakin enters, and for a moment the room holds a fragile, eewed pause. He tells himself that this is mercy, that ending the Jedi now will prevent a greater war, that by serving Sidious, he will gain the power to save Padme from the death that haunts his visions. The children see a hero return from the front. He sees potential threats to the new order he has chosen. His heart recoils, but his fear of losing her presses down harder. In that pressure, conscience bends. By the end of the night, smoke rises from the temple's towers. Archives burn. Holocrons are shattered. And the great halls lie strewn with the remnants of an order that raised Anakin from slavery to knighthood. In his mind, he frames it as a necessary sacrifice, the price for a future where Padme lives and the galaxy knows peace under a single, unchallenged empire. Yet the Force has been wounded, and the echo of that wound will not fade quickly. As dawn approaches Coruscant, Darth Vader stands amid the ruins he has made, unaware that one surviving master is already on the move, and that the next meeting between teacher and student will change everything. Mustafar, love, lies, and the final break with Obi-Wan. On the molten world of Mustafar, power and fear finally collide with love. The dark side has won its war for Anakin's heart. But what happens when that victory must be proved in fire and blood? The answer is the story of a final mission that ends a galactic conflict and destroys a family in the same breath. Sent by Darth Sidious, Anakin arrives on Mustafar as the newly named Darth Vader. In his mind, this is not an atrocity, but a necessary act. Inside the Separatist command center, the last leaders of the war plead and panic as he enters, hooded and silent. Red light from rivers of lava washes across durasteel floors as blue and red blades ignite. What followed was swift and one-sided. The Trade Federation, the Techno Union, the Banking Clan all fall beneath his lightsaber. To Anakin, this slaughter is the final step. Eliminate the Separatist. Council, end the Clone War, and clear the path for a single, unchallenged empire under his control and Sidious's guidance. Over time, the screams fade, replaced by the hiss of cooling metal and distant eruptions. Amid this mechanical hellscape, Padme's ship cuts through the ash-choked sky. She has traced him here from Coruscant, carrying not soldiers or Jedi, but a desperate hope that the man she married still exists beneath the Sith title. On the landing platform, she runs to him, tears and volcanic ash on her face, begging him to leave with her, to raise their child far from this new empire. For a moment, the light side stirs in him. He speaks of ending war, of bringing peace and security, of having the power to stop death itself. Then the pattern breaks. A shadow at the top of the ramp. Obi-Wan Kenobi steps into the open, revealed as an unseen passenger on Padme's ship. To Anakin's wounded mind, this is not coincidence. It is confirmation of every fear. He accuses Padme of betraying him, of bringing his old master to kill him. Love becomes another imagined conspiracy. His hand closes around her throat. The man who once risked everything for her now chokes her into unconsciousness on the black sand. Obi-Wan's shout breaks the moment, and what followed was not merely a duel, but a long, tragic argument with blades. Two Jedi ignite their weapons, but the real conflict is older than Mustafar. As they move through control rooms and along narrow maintenance arms above the lava, they trade accusations as often as strikes. Obi-Wan calls Anakin the chosen one who was meant to destroy the Sith, not join them. Anakin insists the Jedi are traitors, that only the dark side can save Padme and impose order on a chaotic galaxy. Their forms mirror years of shared training. Parry meets parry, step meets step. Brothers in perfect opposition. Over time, the fight narrows to a single slope of black sand above a burning river. Obi-Wan gains the high ground and pleads for surrender. Anakin, consumed by pride and rage, attempts one last leap. In a flash of blue light, Obi-Wan severs his limbs, and Anakin tumbles toward the lava. The heat catches him. Flames race across his torn body as he screams hatred at the master he once loved. Obi-Wan cannot finish him, yet cannot save him. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. In tears, he gathers Anakin's fallen lightsaber and turns away, leaving the broken Sith Lord burning on the shore. As Obi-Wan's ship rises into the dark sky, he believes Anakin Skywalker is truly lost, unaware that the Emperor is already on his way, and that what they find there would change everything. The mask descends. Birth of Darth Vader, death of Padme. Power can heal or destroy, but what happens when that power is used to keep a shattered body alive, while a breaking heart is allowed to fade? The answer is the story of Darth Vader's first breath. On the scorched world of Mustafar, the Emperor arrives. To claim what is left of his new apprentice, medical droids gather the burned remains of Anakin Skywalker. Metal claws lift him from the black sand. His legs severed his lungs, ruined his skin, scorched beyond recognition. What followed was a race against death, not to save the man, but to preserve a weapon for the dark side in a sterile chamber. The reconstruction begins. Banks of instruments hum as the droids work methodically. Mechanical limbs are fused to bone and charred muscle grafts of pale synth skin vanish beneath armored plating. A durasteel chest piece is locked into place, heavy and unyielding around what is left of his heart respirators, and nutrient lines burrow into ruined flesh. The iconic black suit is not a gift. It is a prison, a life support system built by an empire that values obedience over mercy, far away in a bright white medical bay. Padme Amidala fights through a different darkness, exhausted and broken from the events on Coruscant and Mustafar. She is rushed into emergency. Delivery droids move with equal urgency, but for a gentler purpose. The first child arrives, a boy named Luke, then a girl, Leia twins, who will one day stand against the Sith and would shape galactic history. Their first cries echo softly against the quiet hiss of machines, yet Padme's life force slips away. The healers find no physical wound, only a heart that has lost its will to endure. She whispers her final conviction to Obi-Wan that there is still good in Anakin, that the Jedi Knight she loved is not entirely consumed by the dark side. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. Her words planting a seed that over time will guide another Skywalker back to his father, back in the Emperor's facility. The transformation reaches its end. The mask descends, sealing with a mechanical hiss. The world narrows to darkness. Then sound the slow, relentless rhythm of the respirator fills the room. Each breath dragged through scorched lungs by machines. The weight of the armor presses down, every movement stiff, every sensation dulled. Anakin Skywalker is entombed within the armor of Darth Vader. Sidious stands beside the table, his voice soft, almost tender. He tells his apprentice that in his anger, in his uncontrolled rage, Anakin killed Padme and their child. The very future he turned to the dark side to protect becomes the instrument of his torment grief. Curdles into self-hatred, the force around him twists into a storm. Vader rises for the first time. The restraints fall away. Metal boots strike the floor with heavy finality. The respirator's rasp answers the Emperor's quiet satisfaction. In this moment, Anakin believes he has lost everything. His mother, his order, his wife, his unborn child all gone, leaving only anger, obedience, and the faint, buried ember of the man he once was an ember, that in time another Skywalker will try to reach. The Emperor's fist, Vader's early years of fear and control power, has a new face now, and it moves through the galaxy with a mechanical rhythm. The Clone War ends in fire and betrayal, and what follows is a quiet rearranging of maps and titles. The Galactic Republic becomes the Galactic Empire. The Senate still meets, the starships still fly. But in the shadows of this new order, a tall, dark figure begins to haunt corridors and battlefields alike. This is the story of the Emperor's fist in the months after Mustafar Palpatine reshapes victory into permanence. Governors replace Jedi. Peacekeepers, clone legions become instruments of occupation. And above it all stands Darth Vader, towering armored and absolute. His black silhouette at the Emperor's side would shape how entire star systems understand fear. Where once the Jedi symbolized guardianship, Vader becomes the living warning of what defiance now costs. His duties are simple in command and terrible in practice. The surviving Jedi are declared traitors to the state and enemies of peace. Vader is sent to hunt them across the stars in ruined temples on distant worlds in the ruins of the very Jedi Temple he once called home. He walks among the dead and the hiding guided by the dark side and by the Emperor's whispered directives when pockets of resistance arise on former Separatist worlds or Loyalist Republic planets. He arrives with Star Destroyers and Stormtroopers, and the conflict ends swiftly, sometimes with bombardment, sometimes with a single crimson blade. Yet the armor that makes him unstoppable is also a prison. The suit seals him from the open air, encasing burned flesh in black plates and synth skin. Each breath is dragged through a respirator that never falls silent. Pain management systems keep him conscious but never comfortable over time. The simple act of walking becomes a reminder of Mustafar. Every step heavy, every gesture constrained. His movements are powerful but limited, his senses dulled by machinery. Even his own voice emerges, distorted, stripped of the warmth that once drew others to Anakin Skywalker within the Imperial hierarchy. His presence creates a different kind of fracture. Officers of the Navy and intelligence services answer to him, yet many resent this dark enforcer outside their chain of command meetings. Aboard Star Destroyers fall silent when he enters. Admirals choose their words carefully, aware that a single failure can end in a brief, choking gesture and a collapsed body. This constant fear isolates him further, teaching the lesson that only power commands respect, and that loyalty born of terror is the only loyalty that truly endures. But beneath the mask, the past does not vanish in quiet moments. Between campaigns, flashes, return the twin suns of Tatooine setting over sand, the sound of pod racers, the warmth of Padme's hand on his ruined cheek, the blue glow of younglings' lightsabers in the Jedi Temple. These memories have no safe place in the Empire, so they sink deeper into the dark side, waiting for the day another presence in the Force will stir them to the surface, hunting the survivors, Inquisitors, Jedi, and a war in the shadows. In the silence that follows those buried memories, the Empire demands a different kind of war. Not the blazing spectacle of fleets and planetary invasions, but a patient hunt carried out in corridors, shadows, and whispers. This is the story of the Inquisitorius, the Emperor's answer to the stubborn embers of the Jedi Order. In the first years after Order 66, the clones and stormtroopers are not enough, scattered across the galactic rim. Wounded masters, Padawans, and hidden younglings still reach for the light side. So a new instrument is forged. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is the Force itself, bent and twisted into a net cast across the stars? The answer is the Inquisitors. These are not traditional Sith Lords, they are former Jedi, fallen to fear, resentment, or simple exhaustion, along with other Force sensitives, broken and reshaped under Imperial rule, taken to secret facilities. They are stripped of names, given numbers and titles, and turned into hunters. What followed was a long, slow purge that would shape the nightmares of surviving Jedi for years. At the center of this program stands Darth Vader, not merely as field commander, but as architect of their suffering. His training methods are brutal and methodical. He duels them without restraint, severing limbs to teach caution, choking them through the Force to punish hesitation. Sometimes he orders Inquisitors to hunt one another so that failure ends in death over time. This cruelty burns out doubt and leaves only obedience, terror, and a desperate hunger to please their master. Yet every mission they undertake reflects back upon him, each surviving Jedi. They corner is a mirror held up to the life he abandoned a frightened Padawan, clutching a blue blade on a forgotten moon. Recalls the temple on Coruscant, a weary knight protecting refugees on a transport ship. Echoes Anakin's old promise to save the helpless. Every time Vader arrives to finish what his agents began, he must choose between the memory of Anakin Skywalker and the mask of Darth Vader. Years later, when the Grand Inquisitor tracks a fugitive named Kanan Jarrus, it is more than another assignment Kanan once was. Caleb Dume, a Padawan of the Clone Wars, his resistance proves that the light side still answers even the most damaged survivors when Vader finally confronts him. The clash is less about blades and more about identity, a former general of the Republic facing a former child soldier of the Jedi, both scarred by the same betrayal. And then there is Ahsoka Tano, the apprentice who walked away from the Order before it fell. When their paths cross in the depths of a Sith temple, the Force itself seems to hold its breath. She hears Anakin in the mechanical voice. She sees the friend behind the lenses of the mask, and for a heartbeat, the armor cracks. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history if he allowed it. Instead, Vader doubles down. He chooses the dark side again and again because turning back would mean facing everything he destroyed to the wider Empire. He remains a faceless enforcer, a towering silhouette at the edge of every rebellion. But inside the armor, the war between Anakin and Vader continues quietly. Every hunted Jedi, every fallen Inquisitor, every whispered name in the Force adds another voice to that conflict, and far away in the darkness, a new presence is beginning to awaken, one that will not flee when the shadow of Darth Vader finally arrives. Ahsoka returns, the mask cracks. If only for a moment far away on the dead world of Malachor, that awakening presence steps out of the shadows. It is not a rebel fleet or a hidden Jedi Temple, but a single former Padawan walking into the heart of a Sith superweapon. The ancient temple hums with restrained power, its black stone engraved with forgotten runes of the dark side, and at its center, waiting in the cold glow of green energy, stands Darth Vader. This is the story of a meeting that is less a battle and more a reckoning. Ahsoka Tano, older, calmer and tempered by exile, comes face to face with the towering figure she once knew as Anakin Skywalker. The temple around them is a graveyard of an older Sith empire, petrified corpses frozen in the instant of some long-ago catastrophe. What they found there would change everything for Ahsoka. The past she tried to leave, buried, suddenly breathes again. At first, there is only the mask, the vocoder, the measured mechanical breathing. But the Force carries familiar echoes through the dark when Vader speaks her name. There is a trace beneath the distortion, a cadence she remembers. She denies it. She tells herself that Anakin is dead, that this Sith cannot be the same man who trained her. Yet the Force does not lie. And when she reaches out, the truth hits with quiet, devastating clarity. Vader does not flinch. He insists that Anakin Skywalker was weak, that he betrayed the Jedi and was destroyed. This is his armor as much as the black Durasteel Ahsoka refuses that narrative. She calls him Anakin to his face. She tells him she will not abandon him again, that this time she will stand by him against the dark side even if it costs her life. For a moment the mask cracks, not in metal, but in the man beneath. What followed was a duel that is really a struggle over identity. The blades are bright, but the real conflict is older. Ahsoka fights to pull Anakin back toward the light side, to remind him of the Clone Wars, the bond between master and apprentice. the mercy he once showed strangers, that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history if he chose it again. Vader fights to bury those memories, to prove to himself and his master that Anakin is gone forever. In a single shattering instant, her strike splits his mask. The red eye of Vader and the blue eye of Anakin stare out together. His voice warps between them, Sith and Jedi. In the same breath over time, this moment would shape the fractures in his soul. He leaves her in the collapsing temple, believing her lost, yet encounters such as this weaken the walls he has built around Anakin's memory, and faraway destiny is already preparing another confrontation, one that will not end in stalemate, between two Death Stars, Vader, Tarkin, and the politics of fear. In the years that followed that collapsing temple duel, the shattered Jedi Hunter became something else, not only a blade in the dark, but a pillar in a vast machinery of fear. The Empire had learned that scattered executions and local crackdowns were not enough to hold a restless galactic population in place. The question for Palpatine and his servants became simple. How could terror itself be turned into infrastructure? The answer was the Death Star. Around this time in the Empire's history, the first Death Star neared completion in the remote reaches of space. Its skeletal frame of durasteel and armored plates slowly wrapped itself around a single hollow wound, a super laser trench that could erase entire worlds in a single discharge. It was the purest expression of rule through fear of overwhelming force. A battle station the size of a moon meant not for war in the traditional sense, but for demonstration. One shot would shape the obedience of countless systems within this cold project. Two figures stood at the center, Grand Moff Wilhuff, Tarkin and Darth Vader. Tarkin commanded fleets and governors, his authority codified in charters and decrees. Vader commanded something less visible and far older, the Force and the legend of the Sith. The story of their partnership was a study in tension and utility. Tarkin saw Vader as a useful terror weapon, a walking reminder that failure had consequences. Vader saw Tarkin as the Emperor's chosen instrument in the Outer Rim, a man whose ruthlessness mirrored his own. On board that station, their methods intertwined. When Princess Leia Organa was captured over Scarif and brought to the Death Star, the Empire faced a problem. Information had to be extracted quickly before the stolen plans could doom the project. What followed was a chilling collaboration. Tarkin threatened the destruction of entire worlds. Vader applied more intimate pressure through the Force. Traditional interrogation devices hummed beside invisible psychic constriction. The dark side pressed against Leia's mind, probing for the hidden rebel base. Yet even here, surrounded by officers who feared to meet his gaze, Vader remained a servant within a larger hierarchy. Tarkin could order the destruction of Alderaan. Vader did not overrule him. He enforced imperial will, but did not define it above them both. The Emperor watched from Coruscant, content to let his subordinates compete for favor. Over time, ambitious admirals and Moffs learned to work around the Dark Enforcer, testing the limits of how far his authority truly reached. This imbalance revealed a quiet truth for all his immense power. Vader was still a component in a broader system, not a lone warlord, but one instrument in an empire that weaponized both superstition and super lasers for thousands of years. Sith had relied on fear to control worlds, now that fear had a face and a silhouette. As the rebellion grew from scattered cells into an organized alliance, the galaxy began to understand Darth Vader not only as a hunter of Jedi, but as the dark face of imperial oppression itself. And soon that image would be tested against a new kind of hope, a farm boy and a fortress, the first echoes of Luke Skywalker. Hope is fragile, but in a galaxy ruled by fear, even a single hopeful life on a forgotten world can begin to bend the course of empires far away from the steel corridors of the Death Star on the desert world of Tatooine. Another Skywalker stared at twin suns and dreamed of the stars on the surface. Luke Skywalker's life was simple moisture, farming under the watchful eyes of Owen and Beru Lars, repairing vaporators, bargaining for droids, and rushing home before the suns dipped below the dunes. Yet beneath that routine rested a quiet restlessness, the same desert winds that once stung Anakin's face now brushed against Luke's as he gazed upward, longing for something more. The story of father and son began in the same harsh sand under the same blazing sky, one as a slave, one as a farm boy, both feeling the pull of a wider galaxy and of a destiny neither understood over time. The galactic civil war crept toward this quiet homestead when Princess Leia Organa's ship fled Darth Vader's Star Destroyer above Tatooine. The stolen Death Star plans did not vanish into the void. They fell to the surface, hidden in the memory banks of an astromech droid that would wander into Luke's hands. Leia's recorded plea to Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Jedi long in hiding near the Lars farm, became the bridge between generations. Her desperate message drew Obi-Wan out of exile and pulled Luke into a conflict that had begun before he was born. For Vader, the chase was clinical. The Empire's dark enforcer hunted those same plans across space, interrogating captives, crushing resistance and tightening the noose around the rebellion. As the Death Star loomed over the galaxy, he walked its corridors, a towering figure of black armor, surrounded by admirals and stormtroopers, confident that fear and firepower would shape the future of the Empire. He did not know that his own son had left Tatooine in an old freighter, carrying a lightsaber once held by Anakin Skywalker. When the Battle of Yavin erupted, the Death Star faced not a fleet, but a handful of starfighters. Luke flew among them in a battered X-Wing, while Vader entered the fight as he once had in another life. A master pilot alone in the void, cutting through rebel ships with cold precision. Yet in the chaos, he felt something, a presence in the Force, bright, focused, untrained but strong. He remarked on the strength of this pilot, without understanding why that presence felt so familiar. What followed was a moment that would reshape galactic history. Guided by Obi-Wan's final counsel, Luke trusted the light side and fired the shot that destroyed the Death Star. In the blast, Vader's fighter spun away into empty space. He survived, isolated, drifting between stars, carrying with him a faint, unresolved echo in the Force, a question without an answer. And soon that question would begin to demand one: Hoth, Bespin, and a revelation: I am your father. In the quiet aftermath of the Death Star's destruction, the balance between light side and dark side did not settle. It tilted. Power abhors a vacuum, but what happens when that vacuum is felt through the Force by a wounded Sith Lord drifting between the stars? The answer was Darth Vader's obsession. From that moment, the story of Vader became a hunt. Across the galactic rim, probes scattered from Imperial Star Destroyers searched for any trace of the Rebel Alliance. Vader no longer chased mere cells of resistance. He stalked a phantom presence in the Force, the pilot who had humiliated the Empire and survived his guns. When Imperial scanners finally detected life, signs on the frozen world of Hoth, what followed was a brutal demonstration of focus. A TAT walkers advanced through blizzards, shield generators fell, and amidst the chaos, Vader stepped through smoke and snow, personally leading the assault in silent determination. Yet even as the rebels escaped, his attention narrowed further. Over time, the Millennium Falcon became less a ship and more a symbol of unfinished business. He pursued it through asteroid fields and hyperspace shadows, not simply because it carried high-value targets, but because through it, he sensed a thread that led back to Luke Skywalker. The faint question that had haunted him after Yavin now had a name. In that realization lay both a threat and an opportunity. To seize it, Vader turned to strategy rather than brute war. He enlisted bounty hunters, accepted the aid of the cunning hunter Boba Fett, and set a trap not on a battlefield, but in a city among the clouds. Cloud City on Bespin was neutral, industrial, and seemingly far from the front lines of galactic conflict. Yet what they found there would change everything for the Skywalker line. Through pressure on Lando Calrissian, Vader secured control of the facility, capturing Han Solo and Princess Leia as bait. The carbon freezing chamber became a stage of cold orange light and steam. Han was lowered into the pit, entombed in carbonite, as Leia watched in horror. And this act of apparent cruelty was calculated to draw Luke in. When Luke finally arrived, guided by visions and fear, the meeting between father and son unfolded not as a reunion, but as a duel. Their lightsabers clashed through the chamber and out onto the wind-swept gantries of the city. Blue against red, light side against dark side. The pattern should have been simple. Sith Lord crushes untrained Jedi. Instead, the true pattern interrupt came on a narrow bridge above the abyss. With Luke disarmed and wounded, Vader did not deliver a killing blow. He delivered a revelation. No, I am your father. In that instant, the history of Anakin Skywalker crashed into the present. Luke's scream, his denial, and his desperate fall into the void below Bespin were not only escapes from physical danger, but from a truth that would shape everything that followed. For Vader, this was more than manipulation. His outstretched hand and his offer to overthrow the Emperor together revealed a twisted echo of the family he had lost. It was a genuine, if dark, attempt to reclaim power over fate, to end his servitude to Sidious, and to rule the galaxy as father and son. Luke's refusal left that vision shattered, but the connection between them had been named, and neither the Sith nor the Jedi could return to the simpler war that had existed before. The next confrontation would not be about rebels and an empire alone. It would be about the soul of Anakin Skywalker himself. A conflict deepens between Emperor and son, between Vader and Anakin in the quiet that followed their duel on Cloud City. A new kind of conflict began. Not a clash of sabers, but a struggle within the Force itself. The war between Empire and Rebellion continued in the background, yet beneath the grand galactic conflict, a more intimate battle opened between a father bound to the dark and a son reaching toward the light side in the throne rooms and shadowed corridors of Imperial power. Darth Sidious felt Luke Skywalker growing stronger through the Force power, called to power. The Emperor had spent decades engineering a perfect servant in Vader, but now he sensed a fresher potential. What happens when a master of the dark side discovers a new heir to his legacy? The answer was simple. He desired to claim it. Sidious summoned Vader, and in his measured, cruel way, gave a new command: the son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi. Luke was no longer only a rebel pilot, he was a potential Sith heir. The Emperor ordered Vader to bring the boy before him to the heart of the second Death Star. There, Sidious intended to do what he had done to Anakin once before: break hope, twist love, and forge a new weapon. Yet over time, the connection between father and son refused to remain only a tool of the Sith. At the end of The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke clung to the weather vane beneath Cloud City, bleeding and broken, he reached out through the Force. Not to Obi-Wan, not to Yoda, but to Vader. The response was wordless, a presence more than a sentence, a quiet, haunting thread in the darkness. That moment lingered. Vader had once heard Padme call his name across a landing platform on Coruscant. Now he heard Luke across the void between ships. This was not the clean severing of the past. Sidious had promised. What followed was a slow erosion of certainty in Vader's mind. Each meditation in his chamber, each report of Luke's growing legend as a Jedi, reopened questions buried beneath years of obedience. Vader's internal calculus became a storm. He owed everything and nothing to the Emperor. This was the master who had saved him from death on Mustafar, and in the same breath enslaved him inside armor and pain. To remain loyal was to accept that his fate was sealed. To reach for Luke was to imagine something forbidden, that father and son might stand together and reshape destiny. For the first time in decades, Vader's future was not entirely predetermined. Luke's existence cracked the armor of inevitability. The story of Darth Vader was no longer a straight descent. It had become a crossroads. The second Death Star would soon host more than a final battle for the Empire. It would decide a quieter question, whispered beneath the clash of sabers: who was stronger now? Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker? Endor's shadow, a son's faith, and a father's doubt on the forest moon of Endor. The struggles between dark side and light side narrowed to something quieter than war. It became a question of trust, a son's faith set against a father's despair. Luke Skywalker had seen the power of the Empire and the cruelty of the Sith, yet his path now led not to open battle, but to surrender. Around this moment in galactic history, Luke made a decision that would shape everything that followed. Rather than flee the patrols sweeping Endor's forests, he stepped from the shadows and allowed Imperial forces to arrest him. He carried no plan to escape, no secret weapon, beyond a calm conviction that there was still good within the black armor of Darth Vader. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history if it proved true. Escorted to the landing platform, Luke was brought before the towering figure he had once known only as a monster. He did not bow to a Sith Lord or plead with an enforcer of the Empire. Instead, he addressed him with a single word that cut through years of fear: Father. The story of Darth Vader shifted again in that quiet address. What followed was not a duel, but a conversation in the cold light of an Endor shuttle bay's steel walls hummed with distant energy fields. Stormtroopers waited at a distance, and the night air of the forest lingered at the edge of the open ramp. Luke's hands were bound, yet his voice remained steady. He spoke of the conflict he sensed within the dark figure. Before him, he insisted that Anakin Skywalker still existed beneath the mask. Vader answered with doctrine and resignation. He spoke of the power of the Emperor, of the impossibility of escape, of a path long since chosen. He declared that it was too late for him. Yet there were small betrayals in his performance, a pause before each denial, a slight softness in his mechanical breathing. When Luke used the word "Father" again, over time, Vader had built an identity from obedience and fear. The Jedi Knight he had been was buried beneath years of service to the dark side. Luke's refusal to see a monster destabilize that armor of certainty. The son did not flinch from the crimes of the Sith, but he did not accept that they define the man forever. In that tension, a crack widened. Even without a visible face, the conflict was there in the angle of Vader's helmet, as he turned away in the fractionally slower movements of his gloved hands, as he accepted Luke's lightsaber and clipped it to his own belt, rather than destroy it. There was a question in the air that no one voiced, whose will truly guided the next steps as their shuttle lifted toward the second Death Star. The Emperor awaited, certain of dominance, yet the outcome was no longer fixed. Sidious believed he would break the son and keep the father, but the Force had shifted around this quiet surrender. The ascent to the throne room had begun, and somewhere between Endor's forests and the Emperor's chair, a choice waited that even Darth Sidious had not foreseen. The throne room, temptation, rage, and a choice. In the dark, power can be loud in the roar of star destroyers and the flash of turbo lasers, but the most dangerous power in the galaxy often moves in silence. In a high throne room above Endor, an old Sith waited to prove that the dark side would always win. The story of Darth Vader reached its quietest and most volatile point there. Between a father, a son, and an emperor outside the panoramic windows, the second Death Star hung over the forest moon, a half-finished weapon surrounded by a storm of starfighters. Green turbo laser fire crossed red engine trails. Capital ships burned and broke apart. Yet in the throne room, the air felt still. Emperor Palpatine sat in his chair, calm, confident, certain that for thousands of years of Sith tradition had prepared him for this moment. Luke Skywalker stood between them, framed by the stars, between Sith Master and Sith Apprentice, between dark side and light side. Sidious understood that true victory required more than destroying the rebel fleet. It required claiming the last Skywalker. His strategy was simple and cruel. Provoke the son into killing the father, then claim the son as a stronger heir. This was how the Sith Empire had always renewed itself. What, through conflict and betrayal, what followed was not just a duel, but an attempted inheritance of hatred. The Emperor spoke softly, pointing to the battle outside. He revealed the trap around the rebel fleet. He threatened Luke's friends on Endor. Each word pressed on Luke's fear and anger. The Force around them shivered. Luke reached for his saber, resisted, then finally ignited it in a burst of panic. Vader's red blade rose to meet the green, and the duel began. Their clash was more than skill against skill. It was Luke's inner war made visible. Every overhead strike carried his fear for Han and Leia. Every sudden rush came from the memory of Vader's cruelty on Cloud City. Vader probed his defenses, physically and emotionally, speaking of the dark side of the inevitability of the Emperor's victory of turning Luke's sister. If Luke would not turn himself over time, the tempo shifted from measured testing to something harsher when Vader threatened to corrupt Leia. Luke broke. He surged forward with a fury he had never unleashed before driving Vader back across the throne room. The green blade hammered down again and again until Vader fell. Luke's final strike severed his father's mechanical hand wires sparked against the floor. Luke stood over him, breathing hard, his own gloved hand buzzing with the echo of the blow. Then came the stillness. Luke looked from Vader's exposed machinery to his own artificial fingers and understood the path he was walking. He was becoming the same thing. This was the pattern that would shape Skywalker history or break it in a single heartbeat. Luke stepped back, extinguished his weapon, and cast it aside, declaring himself a Jedi, like his father before him. Sidious answered with pure, dark side rage. Blue Force lightning crashed into Luke's body, hurling him to the floor. Vader lay wounded, watching his son convulse, hearing pleas for help. The Emperor's laughter filled the chamber, and for the first time in decades, Darth Vader faced a choice. With no command to follow and no mask strong enough to hide from it, the Chosen One, fulfilled, saving Luke, destroying the Emperor power, can command fleets and shatter planets. But what happens when that power is asked to choose between the dark side and a single dying child? The answer in that throne room above Endor is the story of Darth Vader finally facing himself for a long suspended moment. He does not move. Sidious stands over Luke, a storm of blue energy pouring from his hands. Luke writhes on the floor armor, scorched clothes, smoking his pleas, fading into hoarse screams. Vader turns his helmet from son to master and back again, a slow mechanical pivot that hides an ancient human conflict inside the mask. The storm is worse than the lightning memories crash over him. A sand-swept boy on Tatooine, promising his mother he will come back a young Jedi on Coruscant, swearing to protect Padme visions of her death, driving him into Sidious's arms. Mustafar's fire reflecting in Obi-Wan's eyes, each choice made for power, each ending in loss over time. Those memories had been buried beneath metal and orders. Now Luke's agony drags them into the light side of his mind. Sidious laughs, certain of victory, certain the Sith have finally broken the last Skywalker. But something in the Emperor's words cuts through the noise. He speaks of replacing Vader, of casting aside this broken servant for a younger, stronger apprentice. The old fear of abandonment rises, then meets something new. Luke's declaration, "I am a Jedi, like my father before me." That single word father would shape what follows. Without warning, Vader moves. The decision is silent, instantaneous. His massive frame lurches forward, arms outstretched. He seizes Sidious from behind, raising the Emperor above his head. The torrent of force lightning whips back across his armor, crawling over durasteel plates, burning through circuits, flooding his systems. With raw dark side fury alarms scream inside the suit. But he does not. Aim stop. Sidious howls in rage and disbelief, hurling power into the body that betrays him. Blue fire silhouettes, the two Sith Lords locked together, master and apprentice, bound in lethal reversal. Vader staggers toward the reactor shaft, every step an act of will. The Emperor's face twists from contempt to fear, then to pure hatred as he realizes what is happening. And then Vader throws him. The Dark Lord of the Sith falls, vanishing into endless energy. The scream cuts off. The lightning dies. The throne room falls into a stunned, unnatural quiet. In that instant, the rule of two, that had guided the Sith for thousands of years, is broken not by a stronger Sith, but by an apprentice, choosing love over power. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history with Sidious gone. The galactic empire he commanded begins to crumble, the dark side storm. he nurtured for decades, starts to break the prophecy spoken over a frightened boy on Tatooine, finally turns. Anakin Skywalker brings balance to the Force not through conquest or control, but through sacrifice. His body is failing, systems ruined, flesh, burned lungs fighting for each breath. Yet for the first time since Mustafar, the man inside the machine has done what he always wanted. He has saved someone he loved, not by bending fate, but by accepting its cost. And as the battle outside rages on, the quiet that follows inside the Death Star belongs to Anakin Skywalker, at peace with his choice. Under the mask, a father's face, a son's goodbye. In the shattered corridors of the second Death Star, the roar of distant explosions echoes through metal and fire, and in the center of that collapsing empire, a son refuses to abandon his father. Luke Skywalker drags the heavy frame of Darth Vader through flickering light and drifting smoke each step, a struggle against the weight of armor machinery, and a lifetime of dark choices. The station is dying around them, but Luke will not let the man who saved him be left to vanish in the wreckage system's fail. Alarms scream, and the galactic superweapon begins to come apart. Yet this quiet march through chaos is the story of something far smaller and far more important. One last act of devotion between father and son. The Sith Lord, who once strode through war without mercy, now has to be carried every movement of his ruined body, a reminder of the price that power demanded. Over time, the invincible figure of Vader has become simply a man who can no longer stand. They reach a resting place near a hangar, bathed in the harsh glow of failing lights. And there, Anakin Skywalker speaks through the mask that has hidden him for decades. He asks Luke to help him remove it so he can look upon his son with his own eyes. After years of seeing the galaxy only through red-tinted lenses and targeting displays, this request is almost shockingly human. There is no demand for more power, no plea for survival, only a simple desire to see clearly before the end. Luke hesitates, knowing the mask sustains what remains of his father's life. Yet he honors the request and carefully unlocks the seals. What followed was a soft hiss of escaping pressure and the slow lifting of the black helmet. The dark side's most terrifying visage dissolves into something frail and painfully real. Beneath the armor is a pale, scarred face, skin drawn tight over old wounds, eyes tired but gentle. The war that raged in him for so long has burned itself out. Anakin's gaze settles on Luke, and he manages a small, unguarded smile. There is pride there not in conquest or domination, but in the courage his son showed by rejecting hatred. He tells Luke that he was right, that there was still good in him. He thanks him, not for defeating a Sith, but for saving his father. In this final exchange, the fear that once drove Anakin to betray the Jedi and the Republic finally fades, replaced by acceptance and peace. In that moment, the story of Darth Vader ends and the story of Anakin Skywalker comes to rest. The chosen one who was born in slavery endured. Our war fell to the dark side and served a ruthless empire finds balance. At last, this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, even if most would never know the truth. And as Luke escapes in his shuttle, leaving the Death Star to its fate, another presence is already waiting in the Force. Watching what they found there would change everything. From pyre to presence, legacy, ghosts, and the end of an era. On the forest moon of Endor, the war ends not with a Senate proclamation or a grand parade, but with fire in the trees, while the rebel celebration echoes through the night. Luke Skywalker walks alone carrying the black armor that had once housed the most feared servant of the Empire. There are no banners here, no crowds, only a sun and the empty shell of a Sith Lord. He builds a simple pyre from fallen branches and rough timber. The armor of Darth Vader rests upon it. The mask that once inspired terror now hangs lifeless and still. Luke lights the wood and steps back. Flames catch slowly at first, then rise higher, reflecting off the durasteel shell As the fire grows, the last physical traces of Vader burn away in crackling embers and drifting sparks. This is more than a funeral for a fallen warrior. It is a ritual ending an identity. The destruction of the armor marks the death of Darth Vader as a separate being, a symbol of the dark side that had imprisoned Anakin Skywalker for decades. What followed was not merely the disposal of a body, but the quiet unmaking of a legend of fear. The Force itself seems to breathe around the flames, as if acknowledging that something long bound has finally been released over time. The armor had been a prison as much as protection. Each plate and cable a reminder of loss of Mustafar, of Padme, of the Jedi he hunted now. As the fire consumes that shell, the story of Anakin's spirit changes. Instead of being trapped within metal and hatred, his presence begins to move freely again, drawn back toward the light side he once served. Later, as the rebel fleet regroups and the galaxy feels the first fragile moments without Palpatine's empire, Luke stands apart, watching the celebration on Endor, and then he sees them three luminous figures at the edge of the clearing. Obi-Wan Kenobi, calm and wise. Yoda, small and serene. And beside them, a young Anakin Skywalker, smiling with a peace he had not known since his earliest days as a Jedi. This vision is more than comfort for Luke. It is confirmation that redemption in the Force is real. Anakin stands not as a Sith Lord, but as a restored Jedi Knight, welcomed back into the very community he betrayed for thousands of years. Jedi had warned that the dark side consumes utterly. Yet here is a counterpoint, a single example of return. The consequences would shape the galactic future. The Emperor is dead. The second Death Star destroyed the Imperial command structure. Shattered, this act of mercy would reshape galactic history. As worlds rise in rebellion, sensing the Empire's weakness, Luke carries a complex inheritance. He is heir to both the heroic Jedi General and the enforcer of a brutal regime. A reminder that power can fall and rise within the same soul. The story of Darth Vader becomes, in the end, a long, quiet arc, from fear to acceptance, from control to surrender. It invites a slower reflection, not on battles or starfleets, but on the way the Force moves through a single life. What they found there would change everything, not only for empires and orders, but for the understanding of destiny itself. And as the fires of Endor fade into embers, the galaxy enters a new era shaped by memory, forgiveness, and the fragile return of hope. A life in the Force, from slave to Sith to saved. As the embers of Endor call the story of Anakin Skywalker, can be seen not as scattered moments of glory and ruin, but as a single long breath, drawn in fear and released in surrender. It begins on the hot dust of Tatooine, with a slave child who dreams of the stars and who somehow moves pod racers and droids with nothing but instinct and the invisible currents of the Force. When Qui-Gon Jinn steps into Watto's cluttered shop and meets the boy, the Jedi senses something ancient moving beneath that small frame. A child born without a known father, a presence in the Force that might be the chosen one, destined to bring balance. What followed was a quiet decision that would shape galactic history. Anakin wins his freedom in a dangerous pod race, but must leave his mother, Shmi, behind. Stepping onto a Republic starship with tears in his eyes and a promise to return, years pass, and over time, the slave boy becomes a Jedi apprentice under Obi-Wan Kenobi. He learns discipline and combat, yet the same fierce attachment that made him loyal to Shmi now binds him to Padme Amidala. Their secret marriage defies the Jedi code and plants a seed of fear in his heart. Fear that the war raging around them will take her away. As visions of Padme dying in childbirth begin to haunt his sleep, Anakin's need for control deepens. He turns to Chancellor Palpatine for answers, trusting the hidden Sith Lord more than the cautious Jedi Council. When Palpatine offers forbidden knowledge to prevent Padme's death, Anakin stands at a crossroads between the light side and the dark side. Every fall in his life begins here with the terror of losing someone he loves, choosing power over trust. He kneels and becomes Darth Vader. He marches on the Jedi Temple. He leads clones against former allies, and on Mustafar, He raises his blade against Obi-Wan. The duel ends with fire and ruin, and the shattered body that will require the black armor and hissing mask that will define the rest of his days for the next 1,000 years is an exaggeration. Yet in the stillness of the Empire, it can feel that way. Vader hunts surviving Jedi and enforces the Emperor's will across the galaxy. But beneath the armor, there is a constant conflict. Memories of Shmi Padme and the boy he once was flicker through the dark. Then Luke Skywalker appears, and the pattern shifts. Every moment of grace in Anakin's life comes when he chooses love over control on the Death Star, and later, above Endor, the son refuses to kill the father. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history as Vader turns on Sidious and accepts death to save Luke. The prophecy of the Chosen One is fulfilled not in a single perfect moment, but in a long, painful journey, where even the darkest path finally bends back toward the light, sleeping beside the stars, letting the story fade to quiet in the quiet that follows that final act above Endor. The story of Anakin Skywalker begins to unfold into something larger than one life. A single choice in a single throne room ripples outward until the details blur and only the shape of the journey remains a rise, a fall, a long return to the light side after so much time. In the dark, overwhelming battles and personal conflict shrink when seen from far away. Imagine the galaxy itself turning slowly in the dark, the great spiral of stars, drifting in patient circles for thousands of years. Each star burns steadily, while empires rise and fall. Jedi and Sith contend, and the Force flows through it all. What followed was always another age, another generation, another attempt to claim power and meaning beneath those distant suns over time. Anakin's path becomes one thread among countless others, a bright line that bends sharply into shadow and then softens again. At the end, the Force holds the memory of a slave child on Tatooine, of a frightened apprentice on Coruscant, of a masked enforcer stalking the halls of a galactic empire. But from a higher vantage, these scenes quiet themselves. The pod racers fade, the clash of lightsabers dims, the roar of starships becomes a faint background hum. In this wider tapestry, the contrast between dark side and light side is constant. Not a single war, not a single prophecy, but a rhythm. The Force breathes in and out across history. There are always those who fall and those who return, those who are lost, and those who have found redemption in one era, answers corruption in another, and what they found there would change everything, is whispered again and again on forgotten worlds, in silent temples, in lonely Star Destroyer corridors. This is the moment to let the sharp edges of Anakin's story soften. The names, the battles, the dates can drift to the edges of awareness. What remains is only the feeling of a long road walked to its end. A heavy armor finally set down a mask. No longer needed breathing can match that feeling, slow and even, in and out, as the narrative itself begins to rest around that resting point. The galaxy keeps turning stars, keep burning quietly in the distance. The engines of some unseen starship murmur at a steady pitch, a low constant sound that does not demand attention, but allows thoughts to drift further away for the next 1,000 years of imagined futures. The details can take care of themselves, while the mind simply observes that gentle motion. Each rise and fall, each Sith and Jedi, each war and fragile peace becomes a soft echo. Now, nothing urgent, nothing sharp, only the knowledge that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history, and that the story of one life has reached its closing chapter. The voice telling it grows softer, more distant, almost another background sound in the starfield as the listener drifts beside those patient turning lights, and the tale itself fades toward quiet. Drifting in the Force. Gentle farewell and future journeys. In that fading quiet, the shape of a single life becomes clear, a circle drawn slowly through the Force from its first trembling line to its final closing curve, the story of Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader has now been followed from first breath to final rest, from the harsh suns of Tatooine to the cold metal corridors of the Empire, from the bright promise of a child prodigy to the dark armor of a Sith enforcer, and at last to the soft blue glow of a redeemed Jedi over time. Each era has unfolded in turn, the slave boy racing through dust and danger to win freedom, the new Padawan standing beside Obi-Wan in gleaming Jedi halls, the secret husband holding to forbidden love, even as war consumed the Galactic Republic, then the frightened dreamer reaching for forbidden power to stop a vision of Padme's death, and the armored figure striding through Star Destroyers, hunting Jedi across the stars. What followed was a lifetime of conflict and regret, until a final choice on the second Death Star shattered the chain. Now that chain lies quiet, there is no more duel to fight, no more prophecy to chase, no more emperor to obey or resist, only the knowledge that the Chosen One fulfilled the balance promised in ancient whispers. The Force holds that truth gently, and for the listener resting in the dark, there is nothing more that must be done. No task to complete, no history to remember perfectly, no future to plan, only the slow, easy rhythm of breathing as the last echoes of this tale drift. Away beyond this single path, the galaxy remains vast and patient for thousands of years. Jedi and Sith have risen and fallen. Smugglers have threaded hidden routes between blockades. Rebels have kindled sparks of hope against towering machines of war. What they found there would change everything for their own small corners of history. And each of those stories can be told in the same calm way, on another night, under another quiet sky, for the next 1,000 years, in universe or in memory. The saga of this galaxy can unfold again and again. A contemplative walk through temples on Coruscant, a hushed recounting of Sith plotting in shadowed halls, a gentle tracing of rebel cells, growing into an alliance, each narrative another soft current in the same great river of the Force. And if a wandering mind ever wishes to return to these long, soothing journeys, this channel can become a familiar hyperspace lane, back into that calm galactic night. In the end, the Force itself can be imagined as a vast, endless sky, a dark velvet field without threat or fear, where stars hang motionless and kind, each point of light a moment from Anakin's life. The pod race engines, the first ignited lightsaber, the hiss of Vader's mask, the final unmasked breath. And somewhere among those distant lights rests another small constellation, the quiet pattern of this listening moment held in the same embrace as heroes and tyrants, as Jedi and Sith. And as the mind drifts further, the horizon of that starfield only widens, hinting that beyond even this peaceful darkness, another story waits just out of sight.